Hey everybody, welcome to That Kilted Guy videos, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I went from this crack on the wall to the coated crack on the wall, and then finally a matching texture, all done using a sponge. I'll show you how I do that next. Alright, welcome back everybody to That Kilted Guy DIY Home Improvement, and in this video I'm primarily going to show you how I did the texture on these repairs with just a sponge. Now if you want to see the full video of how I repaired about 15 or 20 cracks in this house like this, I'll do that on a separate video, so be looking for that. But basically what I did in this instance is we did the prep work like this, then we put on some mesh tape, and then of course the next thing is we put on the first coat of hot mud, and then we followed that with a coat of regular mud. And after we did 2 or 3 coats on here, let it dry, we sanded the edges, and we're ready for texture. Now for texture today, what I'm using is just a ordinary sponge that I have modified by pulling chunks out of it with a pair of pliers. You can see what it looks like here, and it's not too difficult to make. You can go get a sponge for about $1. I've actually cut mine in half so that it's smaller. It's easier to dip in and out of my mud pan and such. Now note, if you don't want to make your own, don't want to deal with that, you can actually buy one on Amazon, and I'll put a link to that in the description down below the video. But what we do is we use just any old drywall mud. It could be all-purpose, +3, whatever you have on hand. I wouldn't recommend hot mud. It could cause you a lot of difficulties. And then we take our sponge and we dip it in like you see here and get it fairly loaded. It depends on the texture you're trying to match. The lighter the orange peel is, the less you want to put on the wall. You may want to experiment with this a little bit, but I've done this about a dozen times. I pretty much know how it's going to come out. So this one here has a pretty heavy knockdown. It's pretty flat in a lot of areas, so I'm putting on a lot of mud in this case. And we just keep dabbing it on. You want to get those little peaks showing up, because that's what's going to knock down. So I keep working it. Generally when you put it on, it goes on really heavy right at the first tap, and you just got to keep tapping around like this to spread the mud out and get a nice even texture pattern. Now if you're doing a repair like this, I would advise that you basically look at the texture around the repair, because sometimes on the left side it may be heavier or lighter than on the right side, so you want to adjust your texture as you go across so that it kind of matches. Now what I do is I put it on everywhere and then right up to the edges, and you want to get it right up to the edges and just a little bit over. If you go over very much, it's going to smear because it won't set up at the same speed on the painted surface. So just get it a slight overlap, and then once you get that, usually once you do an area about this size, you don't have to wait with this style of texture. You can just go right into doing the knockdown. For this, I like to use a Lexan knife. So in this case, what I did is I tried using a piece of Lexan. That didn't really work out near as good as the actual Lexan knife. I'll put a link to those in the description also. But I ended up just breaking out my metal knife. I didn't have the other knife with me. And you have to use really light pressure if you use a metal knife. A metal knife will tend to smear it a lot faster, so you might need to let it set up more. So you just go over it. If it's knocking down like you see in this video, that's about right. If it's smearing, you're on it too soon. You need to let it set up longer. If it's barely knocking down, you waited too long. and there's not a whole lot you could do. You might mist it with some fine mist of water out of a spray bottle, and that might help it basically knock down better. Here what I'm doing is I couldn't get the sponge to put the mud right up to the trim, so I'm taking a little dab off of my Lexan knife there and just putting a little mud around the edges to make that edge cleaner looking. So when you get to the edges, you want to pull from the wet over to the dry, and as you hit the dry, right when you hit it, you kind of want to put a little extra pressure because you're trying to flatten it so that it blends right into the other texture. Now when you get done, it should look about like this, and a little pro tip is after it dries, come back and just very, very lightly sand the outer edges with like 220 grit or something. You're just trying to get that edge of the mud you created with this texture to blend right into the old, so it doesn't create a new edge on top of an old edge. That can give away the texture. And then when you're done, I've got a video about how to paint it, but you basically, if you want it to disappear, you need to prime it, let it dry thoroughly, and then put 2 coats of paint on, extending the first one slightly, and then either the second coat of paint, you paint the whole wall, or if it's a flatter sheen, you can sometimes get by with just extending that repair a little bit and not painting the whole wall. And hey, here's some other videos that might help you out. You can click on any of these things on this screen on the left, right, and bottom. And I appreciate you stopping by. Be sure to hit that thumbs up on the way out, and I will see you guys on the next video. Take care, everybody.